So what I would then look at is when we have situations, whether it's in our personal life or our business life, and we get engaged in conversations that become uncomfortable, let's say, and it's often difficult to identify why is it uncomfortable? What is it that's happening that's triggering me? Or where does that discomfort lie? And so one of the things is to differentiate well, as I've shared in the Genius of Non-Judgment, is to differentiate what are the facts. So what was actually said, or what did the person actually do, or what are the measurable aspects of the event that I can establish and then say, okay, there's that. And those can be correct or incorrect. We can refine those, we can double check them, we can, go back and look and see, was the door open or closed? Was the light on or off? Was it 20 degrees or 50 degrees? And so forth. The other side of that, though, of our experience is our perception of those facts. And our perception is always valid. It can never be right or wrong. So we can never pass our perception and our experience of something through the same measurement of correct or incorrect as we do with facts, because our perception is always valid. We have reasons for it. So to stand, first of all, to stand in judgment of ourselves for our reaction, for our perception, is erroneous. It takes our attention away from the actual experience. Now we're occupied with judging ourselves for our experience rather than actually dealing with the experience. So that's only one way that judgment is actually ineffective, or it spins us off of the matter at hand, if you will. So if I remember correctly, we were talking about business colleagues over the years, and we all have experiences of colleagues and acquaintances and family members that do or say things where we feel unjustly treated, we've been disadvantaged, we've been maligned, and that doesn't feel good. The thing, it not only does it not feel good, but we often then engage with defending ourselves. Like, I didn't do that, I didn't say that, that's not what happened. And we start pushing back against the slight or the accusation or whatever it is that's coming at us. The reason that we do that is because we are believing that what that person has said about us is actually about us, rather than understanding whatever they're sharing with us, they're telling us something about them. So this is just a general rule that one can use. Whenever somebody's talking, they're telling you something about themselves. They're either telling you something about how they feel and experience themselves, or they're telling you something about their filter through which they are experiencing or seeing you. That does not make it a fact. But because it comes from an external source, and we've been trained to believe external sources, it's just how it is as human beings, we listen to their perception, their experience, what it is that they're telling us, and we take it as a fact. And that's what we then start arguing with, is that supposed fact as though it were truth about us. So I'll stop there and let that sit, or see if that resonates, if that, yeah.
It does. I think first a question I would have, and this is something not just in my own personal experience, but I often hear people talking about is people today have various degrees of exposure to what I'll call it psychology, because I think folks try in some instances to be a little bit more attuned to what's going on, or I hope they do. And one of the things we often talk about is how your perceptions color your reactions. And how can a person, instead of having, as you were talking about, a knee-jerk emotional reaction, for example, let's take rejection. That I think is a very common thing. People probably say, I was the last kid picked on the team in school. I wasn't one of the popular kids. These are phrases we all have often heard said or ourselves said. That's very deeply rooted because perhaps it's occurred in childhood or situation has occurred in a family or friend environment. how does a person start to isolate or even or differentiate and saying, okay, my reaction is coming from this, but I'm a mature adult now, and I need to develop a different response to a situation that perhaps it was okay to react that way when you were 12 or 10 or 15, but you're not that age anymore. And I think that's a challenge a lot of us snap back into, which is um, uh, la 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 la, which doesn't have any place when you're an adult.
Great question. So basically, it's what belief do you want to align yourself with? So, and it's not a matter of being an adult or not an adult, right? Adult is just a term that we give to a certain phase of life when we've passed through a certain number of years, and then we say now we're an adult. We're emotional beings from birth to death. That's just how we are in the human existence. So what I like to rather refer to is, what belief am I engaging about myself or the world in this moment? And in certain situations, like let's say it isn't a work scenario, and somebody is vying for a contract and they don't get it, but their colleague gets it, and they feel left out, and it reverberates back to, wow, I wasn't chosen for the kickball team, all those years ago. And I can relate to this personally because I was not athletic as a kid. I had to learn that. And so I was one of those kids that wasn't ever, selected. I was like the last one standing there saying, hey, what about me? So those experiences make imprints on us because when we're younger, we're having first experiences consistently, right? There was the first time that we stood there and weren't picked for the kickball team. And we sat there and we had an experience. Maybe people laughed at us. Maybe people made comments toward us, or we had our own thoughts about it. And then we create a belief, or we have an imprint of that experience. And unless we re-tape that, redesign that experience and that belief, we just carry it with us because there's not been anything to say that we shouldn't. So then here we are suddenly in a business scenario, and we vied for a contract. We know we're capable of it. We don't get the contract, our buddy does. And emotionally, psychologically, if you will, which is experientially, we're back on that playground, not being picked for the kickball team. So the question is then, as I said before, the genius of non-judgment is, what are the facts? And the facts of the situation are that the other person got the contract, their bid was lower, whatever the reasons are, we have the facts, and the facts are correct or incorrect. Then we look at, what is my perception of that? And the perception are those beliefs. And you can even ask yourself, how do I feel about this? Excuse me. What are my thoughts about this? What beliefs am I holding? When you break down your experience of that situation, of those facts in that way, you get to know yourself in the here and now. So, for example, let's take the example with the contract. Well, I feel rejected because I believe that I'm not wanted in this business, in this field, and I'm not good enough to compete. And I'll never get anywhere. This always happens to me. So those are beliefs, like mantras, that when we break it down, when we take a situation, which I call an opportunity, a critical situation, and crisis is always a risk and an opportunity. It's the Chinese characters that define crisis. So in situations, and we could call this a crisis, a mini crisis, if you will, personal crisis or professional crisis, there's an opportunity in that. When you take it apart that way and you look at what your experience of it is, you gain information about how you operate. And just like a computer, the computer is only a box of metal unless you have a software system that's operating it. So understanding yourself is like understanding your own software, how you operate. And what you can do then, when you look at it and you say, okay, I believe I'm not good enough. I just said that, I must believe that. Do I believe I'm not good enough? Well, if I, look at my experience and I look at the other contracts I've had, I look at the client's satisfaction, actually, I don't believe that. I know I'm good enough. Okay, so there's one thing. I'm rejected. I'm not wanted here. Is that true? I feel rejected because they didn't get the contract. Well, he came in, $1,000 cheaper, and they're, all about money, and they're not really about quality. I know that about this company. Actually, I don't have a need to feel rejected because their reasoning makes total sense why they would choose this other person. Or maybe our prices were similar, our quality is similar, and they simply chose the other person. I don't know why. I could ask why, I could take the time. I could just take it on the chin and say, well, there's something else will come. So what we're doing in that situation then is we're updating, if you will, our operating system to today, because we are no longer on the playground where we're not being picked for the team. There's something happening today that we can take apart. At that point in time when we were smaller, we didn't have those tools available. We probably didn't have the opportunity, and we probably didn't have anybody guiding us through it. We heard, don't be such a baby, buck up, get over it, doesn't matter. Things that really don't help us process it at the time. But now we have tools that we can implement to process. And so that's how we can then move forward and kind of update ourselves to where we are, to the experiences we're having today.
So extrapolating on that, you gave a concrete example that I'm sure most folks can relate to. I didn't get a contract, I didn't get the job. And that, as you say, that makes a person go, very technical response. But let's say that along the same lines, a situation occurs in the work environment. And this is a situation where you feel that it's putting you at professional risk. So a couple of concrete examples. Someone with whom you work makes a remark about you not being honest. Or perhaps they say, I feel like you're putting too much pressure on me. These are situations I've had a lot of colleagues talk about, or you're harassing me. Language that in some cases today is very dangerous as we have the whole #MeToo environment. And effectively, you feel that they are impugning your character or stating that you have done something which presumably you have not done. And that, I think, can really trigger even stronger emotional responses because it's no longer about a project, for example, it's about you as a person, how you comport yourself, how you operate, whether it's in a friend, family, or business environment. And some pretty severe scripts can kick on, ranging from I'm going to get back at them. This is something I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm going to get them for saying such a thing. And I think we often see that behavior on social media where people pop off, engage fingers before brains. How can people better manage or navigate or, I don't know, reprocess, to use your words, so that their reaction is constructive, does not damage themselves, further carry the problem forward, but also doesn't permit a situation to start to escalate at work, where by being passive, they're not, I don't know if these are the right words, not taking control of the situation, but not managing it so there's no damage coming on them where, say, their boss begins to believe, hey, maybe this is how you behave because so-and-so is going on and on about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, those are situations that come up all too often of having false accusations, and especially in today's work environment, when the word harassment comes, and it doesn't matter what the gender is or race is, those are hot buttons, and can trigger a whole lot of different reactions and experiences. So I come back again to what it is that's actually happening and slowing things down. So oftentimes when I have conversations like this, people say, well, gee, you make it sound so easy, or you make it sound so mechanical. It's not, but I'm breaking it down for you in a way that makes it accessible. So the first thing really is to just slow the process down and take a look at what's happening. And there's something I talk about, which is internal and external orientation. So let's say that somebody's making accusations. The only reason you got the contract is because you're best friends with the boss's wife and you guys play tennis all the time. And so he wants to give you the contract because he knows that you two are friends, and he'll get guff at home if he doesn't give you the contract. And then that starts spreading. So now there's nepotism going on and so forth. So if you are engaging with that, you're externally oriented. Your thoughts are out there, your listening is out there, your occupation, your processing is what they're thinking, what they're saying. Take that information, have external awareness, but without being dominated by the externals. And then you turn within, internal awareness of what's going on. So as I said earlier, what is my experience? What do I feel? What do I think? And what do I believe? And in that internal experience, you can pose those questions. Did I get the contract only because I'm friends with the boss's wife? Actually, I didn't even think about being friends with hers. And I see her maybe, twice a year at the tennis court, and that can't have anything to do with it. And actually, the contract that I vied for, the proposal I put in, was exceptional. And it came in even under budget of what they wanted. So no, the contract was really valid. Now, the fact that they're sharing all this is really not true. And it's probably illegal or not proper for the workplace. So what do I want to do about that? So now you're in a place of, you don't have to defend yourself against the accusations, because all you're going to do then is you're continuing that external domination. Now the external situation is dominating your experience. So you take your experience back to your internal awareness, or your internal experience while you're externally aware, but you have the internal experience, and you make your decisions from there. And here's what's important. Even if that situation goes down the road of you can't stop them from talking about you, you end up getting the contract retracted because of the accusations, maybe you even lose your position or your reputation is injured. If you come from that place, if you anchor yourself internally and you get clear on what's really going on for you, and you, how should I say, align with what you know to be true, and you act from that place, even if circumstances come that you don't want, like losing the contract or losing a job, you will have a personal satisfaction with how you have walked through that when you remained internally anchored. When people go external and stay externally dominated and start, I didn't say that, and how dare you, and I'm going to get back at you, and this isn't okay. And then they go to social media, or they spout off to the HR department in a way that's not, let's say, useful. That internal experience that you're having, it's knee-jerk. It doesn't feel good to you. So however that plays out, whether you get the contract or you don't, your experience of that is not going to be satisfying to you. So what's important for me, and what I teach my clients and my students, is that internal experience is paramount. It doesn't mean that you're self-centered and you don't see the world. It means that you're coming from a place in yourself that's clear, that's fair. So you have clarity, you take ownership, you resolve any kind of issues that aren't proper. Even maybe you have to say, you know what, I am friends with the boss's wife. You're absolutely right. Has nothing to do with this contract. So you resolve any critical issues, and then you come from a place of excellence within yourself. And when you do that on a consistent basis, your actions and your path are going to feel good to you. That doesn't mean that you celebrate and say, rah, rah, I lost the contract. I'm not saying that, but you're going to lose contracts. People are going to say things about you. When those things happen, you're in a place of power. You maintain your sovereignty when you're able to stay anchored in that internal space.
So one thing I think that people might ask you is, everything you say is making very good sense. It's also speaking from more of a being clear-headed. We're emotional animals. I think it's very, especially when you feel that whether losing a project or someone is creating a difficult situation for you in the work environment, people may say, well, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm hurt. In other words, they articulate their feelings, which can be very intense. I've had people who were working with me, and I worked in different positions over the years. And the first thing that would come up in these difficult situations is, I feel, not even I feel, a statement of emotion. How can people get their arms around that quickly, while not putting down how they feel, but rather putting a sense of proportion, even if it's, a step back and go take a walk, before that emotion guides their immediate response. And as you were saying earlier, they go to HR, they pop off, or due to social media. Because I think today much more easy for people to respond instantaneously with emotions, and later they regret that they did that, or they get even angrier that they responded that way, and it becomes a terrible vortex that just builds and builds. So sometimes it translates to an explosion. How can people manage those emotions, whether with in the work environment or collegial or friend or however the case may be?
Excellent question. Because we are emotional animals. We're human beings, and we're not only human beings in our private field, right? We're human beings everywhere, and our experiences come everywhere. And so the question then is, how do we, yeah, what do we do with that? So there's an acronym that I have called SODA: see, own, accept, decide, and act. So the first thing is to see it and own it. So if somebody, now, if you're working with somebody, or even if you do it with yourself, let's start with yourself, because that's, I think, the easiest place, is to recognize it, to see it, to name it verbally. I'm angry. And what we have been trained in, especially here in the Western world, I'm going to say the Western hemisphere, is we push away from feelings that don't feel good. I'm angry, don't want to go there. Or we express it in such a way that the reason for the anger is out there. We somehow try and separate ourselves from that experience, which is uncomfortable for us. So the first step is to see it and then own it. I'm angry, like settle into it. And that doesn't mean you get to punch someone in the face or hurt yourself at all, but to first be with it, own it, and not be afraid of experiencing what you're experiencing, even if it is fear. There's something very powerful in allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling. So I have worked with people in the Me Too movement. And what's most important, the first step is to own these experiences, own the emotions of the experiences, because unless you do that, you are not going to be able to have the clear-headedness in order to actually take action. So by seeing and owning and processing your feelings, and then you're able to move forward. So I'm also a mediator. And when I work with people that are very upset, angry for various reasons, the first thing that I do is go into listening mode, that I really hear them and I let them know that I've heard them. So you're frustrated because you put a lot of effort into this proposal, and you may know the boss's wife, but that has nothing to do with the impact that you could make should you get the contract. You know your work is quality, and you feel it's totally unjust that you now are being put into question merely because of a relationship that's not even that impactful in your life. It has nothing to do with your work. The person who's listening to that says, absolutely, they feel heard. So when we feel heard, we're able to let go of that or shift out of that into a place of, okay, what now? If we don't feel heard, even by ourselves, if we don't, or from ourselves, we tend to cling to the very thing we're saying we don't want. We cling to our anger and we'll get louder and we'll stomp harder, because by golly, we want that to be valid. We want it to be heard. So we can give ourselves that validity. As I said, the perception is always valid. We can give ourselves that validity by seeing it and owning it. There's actually a physiological process that happens in this situation. When we get into anger or intense emotions, fear, sadness, we go into our back brain, our base brain. And the base brain is our reptilian. It's the oldest part of our brain, and it's the part that's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. And as long as we're back there arguing and uncomfortable and angry, we literally do not have the capacity to be up here in our frontal lobe, which is where our cognitive processes happen. So if we really want to make the best decisions for ourselves, if we want to take care of ourselves the best way we know how, the first step is to see and own those emotions, those experiences. Give ourselves the opportunity to be here in that reactive place, but in a place that's safe. We're on our own. We're with people we trust. We work through it. When that has taken place, then we can move forward and say, okay, now I can come here to my frontal lobe and say, now what do I want to do? What makes sense? What's fair to me? What's fair to the other person? And then we can act in a way that's really going to serve us best, not only in the immediate situation, like venting on a social media platform, but not only now, but also long term.
So you were talking about soda and owning. How do you continue to proceed through soda? So your next steps, you mentioned are accept, decide, and act. Could you, given that scenario, could you walk through the process that would be involved in completing the soda?
Mhm. So the next thing is, so you've looked at the situation, you've looked at your experience of it, you've owned, you bet I'm angry, you bet I'm sad, I feel left out, and you sit with that and you get it confirmed either from people you trust, or you do it for yourself. And then you sit with, okay, I get that's how I feel. And from this place, now how do things look? Well, from that place of acceptance, I can see more clearly what actually the lay of the land is. And I can separate those facts from my experience better after I've gone through that process of seeing and owning. And when I'm in that place of acceptance and things have calmed, my nervous system has soothed, and I can see more clearly, then I can see what are my options. What do I want to do? What decisions could I make, and which ones do I want to make based on what's happened and what I see? But I'm making now those decisions from this place of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that I say, oh, yay, my reputation is in question. Oh, this is wonderful, I may lose the contract. That's not what acceptance is. Acceptance is being able to sit easily with what is. Just to be in a place of ease with what is without resisting it. It doesn't mean that you want it or you're celebrating. It means you're allowing it to be, and you're recognizing, oh, it is that right now. And so from when you see then from that place of acceptance what your opportunities are for making a decision, then you can decide which one makes most sense. And you may want to talk to some people, do some strategizing, some brainstorming. And when you've come up with a decision, maybe you want to go to to the boss first instead of HR and say, listen, these rumors are going around. I struggle with them because they're not true. I put in a very valid proposal. I think that it would do good for your company. And I am not okay with the fact that these rumors are circulating, and I'd appreciate for you to do something. So from that decision that makes sense to you, then you act on it. You actually make a move toward, for example, talking to the boss. Or maybe the boss is the one that started the rumors. Then you go to the HR department and say, so listen, I've got difficulty here. I really don't know what to do. This is happening on this side. This is happening on this side. And when you're in that place of acceptance, after you've owned your own process, when you're in the place of acceptance, you're able to see more facets. You don't have that myopic, it's only me, this is horrible. Your blinders open, it's like, oh, wow, all this stuff is going on. And then you accept that it is that way. You can sit with that. And from that broader vision, then you're more able to make decisions than when you have these blinders on like this. Then you have more factors to consider, and you have more skills of your own to actually draw upon, and then you can take action from there.
So it sounds like one of the key parts of what you're talking about is the importance of stepping back, rather than taking an immediate reaction in a difficult situation, unless obviously if you're threatened physically in some fashion, but in a work environment or otherwise, rather than take an immediate response, it's not that you're advocating retreat, but almost retrenchment, that a person should, deep breath, step back, disengage if possible, and, move away from it. So give me a role play, for example. Let's pretend that I come into you and I'm very upset and angry, and I make an accusation. A person's natural response is going to be instant defense. So, Lisa, I don't think that you've been a straight shooter. I've heard that you've been gossiping about me behind my back and making claims that I've been harassing you in the work environment, and I'm pissed off.
So the very first thing, and I have on my website, it's Lisa Steindorf /pivot, PIVOT. And it takes you actually through 3 distinct steps of how to deal with a crisis, but it's basically what we're talking about. And that's a really useful thing. So the first thing is that you go within. So you would use the terms earlier to say to take a step back. Actually, it's that you take a step in. So if you come to me and you make these accusations toward me, I'm listening to you. I'm externally oriented. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm hearing your words. We've been trained to go out into that. I didn't say that. How could you? And I take my energy, my orientation, and push it outward or keep it outward because I was already there listening to you. What I'm suggesting and what I know is impactful and effective is to take your awareness and bring it in. I'm being accused of this. Doesn't feel good. Don't want to be accused. Let me look at it. Actually, that's not true. I'm not a bad person. I didn't do it incorrectly. I've not had anything that should be attacked right now. So I first take stock of my experience. I give that credence. I don't get lost in it. I don't go there forever. I give it credence. And from that place, when it has sorted through that seeing and owning, then I can say, okay, this is my experience. So now I've gone from this myopic, right? And now I start to open it up. It's like, okay, but she's sitting in front of me now making these accusations. Huh. Now I'm in a curious place. Why is that? I'm having this experience over here. She's having that one over there. Now, what that's predicated on is that your experience is valid also. What we have been taught is that either you are right or I am right. Somebody has to be right. We can't both be right. But the premise is false. The premise of that conversation is that our experience can be right or wrong. It's an invalid premise. The facts can be right or wrong. The paper could have been handed to the boss. The stock market could have crashed by 30 points, whatever it is. That can be correct or incorrect. That can be measured. But my disappointment about the boss's response is valid. Your response to the boss's actions is valid. There is no right or wrong between us. When I have that as my premise and you're accusing me, I can look at myself and say, wow, so I'm experiencing this. This doesn't feel good. Haven't done anything wrong. I'm okay with that. But she's over there having this other experience. Now I come from that internal orientation and I check in outside of myself. I say, wow, she's having that experience. And I'm curious, how can I have this experience when she's having one that is completely different and she's agitated? So then I can do a couple things. I can either not get involved, go another way. So you know what, this has nothing to do with me. Walk away. I can be curious and ask a couple questions, which may support you to be clearer so I have a better understanding. If I'm really in a place of sovereignty within myself, I could actually go to understanding for you. Really? So you feel that I've treated you unfairly. You feel like this hasn't been good for you or that you're going to lose income. What I do in that situation is I give you the opportunity to calm your nervous system. I give you the opportunity to be heard because you are being heard. And now your experience is just as valid. And here's the beauty of when you're able to do that with someone. If I'm going to understand your experience of valid, automatically something's going to shift in you, and at least the question's going to come up of, why is she now understanding me? Right? There's some kind of curiosity because the traditional resistance and defensiveness and fight back and forth isn't taking place. And it's in that moment, this is what I love when I do mediation, it's in that moment that an opening takes place. And then that person may be interested in my perspective. Well, how did you experience it? You're sitting here understanding me. So what, isn't it that way for you? And it's fascinating. Then the person, I can say, no, actually it's not that way for me. For me, it's this way. Now you're in a conversation. Now that's an ideal scenario. And however, I have consistently been able to myself do that in situations throughout the years. And I've also helped other people learn this tool so that they've been able to do that for themselves, whether it's with their children, spouse, colleagues, wherever it is out in the world in general.
Now, you mentioned an interesting term there. You serve as a professional mediator. Very commonly in the work environment, there can, it's one thing when you're talking with a peer, peer-to-peer conversation. Can you talk a little bit about your role as a mediator in facilitating where it's your boss saying something to you like that, where all of a sudden the playing field is tipped. If let's pretend that, let's say your boss comes in, or my boss comes into me and makes an accusation, or says, I've heard that. In other words, we'll call it the gossip tree that is present in every organization. So now you're probably in a more intense perception of threat because it's your boss talking to you. Talk a little bit about how you can help people mediate through that and at least get it into a position of non-confrontational, but because I think that's part of the problem. It turns it very rapidly into a confrontation environment, and that I think makes all parties even more uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, and the confrontation comes when you're believing that there's something to defend yourself against. If you are coming from the paradigm that no person's perspective is correct or incorrect, if you come from the paradigm that all perspectives are valid about the situation, then you're always in a position of wanting to understand or being able to communicate because there's nothing to defend yourself against. So that's the first thing. And you said it very beautifully. You said, how do we deal with this more intense perception of threat? And that word perception is key because if I'm going to operate from this paradigm that my experience is always valid, and I'm checking in with my internal experience, and I'm checking in externally with awareness, and I'm doing this dance, but anchoring myself first internally, then there's no situation that is more intense or less intense of a threat. So I could be sitting in front of my child, or I could be sitting in front of the person who signs my paychecks. It's not going to change because my internal anchoring is the only thing that's valid in that situation. So let's say my boss is the one saying this to me. I've heard XYZ. I do the same thing. I hear what's going on. I hear what's being said to me. I go within. How am I feeling in this? Actually, I've not done anything wrong. He could fire me on the spot. Okay, he could fire me on the spot. I still haven't done anything wrong. So I feel now I'm anchored. I've not done anything wrong. My actions were totally on point when we had that meeting the other day in the conference room. I don't know what he's heard, but I know what's going on. So now I can make decisions on how I want to respond. Do I want to say, to heck with you? You question me all the time. I'm leaving here. I'm done with this job. Do I want to say, well, actually, I had a different experience of what was in the conference room. Would you like to hear about it? Would I like to maybe listen to his perspective? Tell me about what you heard. I'm curious. And why is it that you're asking me? We've worked together for 20 years. Why are you doubting me? I'm curious about that. So when I'm in this place of being anchored in my own knowing of what is true for me, I have the power really to make to have a lot of choices on how I want to act, what decisions I want to make, and then what action I'm going to take. So in that situation, that's where I would come from, is anchoring within myself and then speaking to my boss from that place with respect, knowing full well he's going to sign my checks, but I never abdicate my own power in any situation.
As we're coming to a close on our interview, something I'd like to address, which I think is very relevant. We're in the thick of a pandemic. I think people's emotions are particularly frayed right now. It's not just an individual's emotional tension, it's everything around them is emotionally tense. And my understanding is when your environment is compounding a situation, a person's responses and reactions can become even more pronounced and knee-jerk, if you'd like to use that term. As people are looking at what's going on around them, and it's not going to go away quickly. I mean, we see the protests going on, people carrying guns, people saying, I don't need to worry about a mask, and then others saying, are you crazy? You need to be wearing a mask. In these very, very challenging times, we're apt to react more quickly without thinking. Can you provide some advice and direction where it'll help, I think, everyone better navigate what is probably going to be going on for a while here in a constructive, productive way where they don't hurt themselves, but they also don't hurt others.
Yeah. So again, I come back to the 3 points that I have in the pivot plan on the website that I suggested to you. Is the first one is to not be externally dominated. And that's difficult because you turn on the television if you own one. You go to the office, you hear things, or you're on Zoom meetings, you hear things, you talk to people over the garden fence, you hear things. It's hard to not be influenced, but there's a difference between being influenced and being dominated. And so the practice that I keep coming back to is what I call self-studentship. It's basically getting to know how you operate. It's getting to know your own operating system. And the better that you get to know that, the more able you are to operate, to function, and to select when am I externally oriented, not dominated, and when am I internally oriented, and when do I do what? So, I have children, and when they go to concerts and things like that, I'm always encouraging them to have situational awareness, which is external awareness as well. That if they're at a concert, they stay to the edges of the crowd. If the energy is getting too intense, they, make sure that they can get out of there quickly. First of all, is to know where the exits are. That's not paranoia by any means, but if you're in an enclosed structure with, 1,000 people and energies go high, things can turn quickly in crowds. So to have that situational awareness is a function, if you will, of that self-studentship, of knowing myself, knowing my environment, and how do I operate in the world in that interaction. So the first thing is to have internal awareness, internal orientation, external awareness, not external domination. Then the second thing is to use your, what I call internal GPS, that you know how to operate, you know what decisions to make, because you've been using these skills for, a couple years anyway, right? If you're over 21. What feels right to you? What do you know to do? You gather information from various sources, but then you use yourself as your guidance system. And you trust that, because your guidance system is what got you here today. It's gotten you all these years. You've taken information, you've had input, people have helped you, people have hindered you, but your guidance system is what got you here. So to absolutely rely on that internal GPS. And then the third piece is what I call streamline and strategize. So especially in circumstances that we're in today, which are very, critical, let's say, that you get rid of the things that you don't need. And I'm not just talking physical. You get rid of habits, or you let go of thought processes, become aware of them, and then release them that are not serving you. And you become strategic about what you do want to do. So if you're changing a business and you have been doing, I have a client actually, she's a beautician and she does amazing massages. She's actually a licensed clinical massage therapist. Can't touch anybody now. So I've been working with her after we've gone through this process, not being externally dominated. She lost all of her massage clients, right? Then going internal, what's important to you? What feels right to you? I want to help people feel good about themselves, especially in this crisis. I said, okay, so now let's streamline and strategize. What do you need to get rid of? Well, I need to let go of my massage practice building. So she had to let go of her office. And what I want to do now is I want to focus on my beauty products. She has peeling masks, she has different things, skin moisturizers, all natural, handmade. I want to focus on that because I can sell those online. So then we strategized how she could go about utilizing what she has available to her in these circumstances. So that's just one example of how you can walk through those 3 pieces of external awareness with internal orientation, using your internal GPS, and then streamlining and strategizing in whatever circumstances. And you can take those 3 steps and do a mini within 5 minutes if you're in a crowd, or you can extend them and make them more detailed if you're actually turning your business around.
As we're wrapping up, are there final thoughts you'd like to share regarding helping people? We deal with situations our entire life. One thing after another happens. Sometimes we feel like we're on top. Sometimes we feel like we're on the bottom. Sometimes we're not sure where the heck we are. And I think it's people's nature sometimes to default back to what they know best or what they've been doing. It takes time to reprogram or to become, to use your terms, better acquainted with your operating system. How can people help solidify these practices you're sharing so that it becomes their new foundation as they move forward?
That's an excellent question. How you can make this sustainable, actually, is what I'm hearing. So this may sound, I was speaking with somebody recently, another client, and we were talking about soft skills. It used to be, he's a CEO, that people would poo-poo the soft skills, and then somewhere in the 90s or the 2000s, they said, oh no, soft skills are so important. It's actually a mixture. If we come back to the computer, without the software, it's literally just metal, plastic, and glass, right? And whatever else they put inside in those little bits. It's the software that makes that lump of materials a functional tool and something we can enjoy and something can serve us. How we are with ourselves is the same thing. So our self-studentship are the soft skills that we need to learn to know who we are. And a tool for that, and it sounds so simple, it's ridiculous, and it's so powerful, is coming to the breath. And why is the breath important? Not only because it's life-sustaining, but it is with us from birth to death. If you think about it, our thought processes are not. When we are born, we haven't developed language yet. So we don't even have the ability of thought. And as we get older, when we have dementia, sometimes, not always, and it's not necessary, but it happens, we can lose thought capacity. But the breath is something that carries us through our entire lives. So there is a consistency that we can rely on. So when we're in a situation, especially in crisis or trauma, when we can bring ourselves back to the breath and just feel the breath come and go, we are reminded of something that is unshakable and stable, no matter what the circumstances are, because your breath never leaves you. And when you anchor in that, when you remind yourself, oh, there's that breath, and there's that breath, and there's that breath, you give yourself the opportunity to slow down your nervous system, to come to that place of seeing and owning what is, to accepting it, and then to engaging that intellect, engaging the heart and the mind at the same time in order to make your decisions.
Excellent.